Good afternoon. This is another part in our continuing series on Let's Talk Nevada of Talk to Let's Talk, where we ask candidates running for local and national offices to speak with us about their view on issues so that we can publish them and advertise them for them and put their viewpoints for all to see. Today we're lucky to be talking to Lucy Flores, a candidate for Congressional District 4 here in Nevada, office currently held by Republican Crescent Hardy. Lucy, thank you for talking to me.
Thanks for having me.
We'll get right into it here. You have been in the state legislature for a couple of terms, and I'm sure that was a lot of fun. But I'm sure you learned to do
productive fun.
I'm sure you learned to do battle. Let's assume for a moment that you are elected to be our U.S. Congressman from Congressional District 4, and yet the House of Representatives is still controlled by Republicans. Mm-hmm. How do you think you'll be able to fit in and get legislation done, or at least contribute to keeping horrible legislation from getting done?
First and foremost, I think it's important to remember that there's a number of different ways that you can be an effective legislator and an effective representative, and it's not always just by passing legislation. Passing legislation is important, and I have a very good track record of doing so. In fact, close to 80% of the legislation that I introduced during my last legislative session was actually signed into law under a Republican governor. So I have been very good at working with my colleagues and getting good substantive legislation passed. And so of course I would take that same skill set to Congress. And there's been plenty of examples of legislation that has been passed in this Congress, although unfortunately it hasn't been as much as we'd like, that's for sure, because of the obstructionism that's occurring there, but it has been done. And so in terms of actually getting things done through the legislative process, I have a stellar record when it comes to that, and there's plenty of examples of good pieces of bills coming out of Congress. That being said, I think it's also important to remember that there's a number of different other ways that you can bring services and resources to the district, and that's by creating partnerships with philanthropic organizations, grant-giving organizations. It's by creating a stellar constituency service office and making sure that there's a delivery of services and a delivery of resources that is still going to the people in the community. And so there's always a number of different ways, and frankly, it's about how creative you are and how hard you're willing to work to actually bring resources and programs and and good delivery of service to the community.
Thank you. Getting to the heart of the matter, let's say you are elected. What would be the first part of legislation? What is your passion that you would introduce, support, and fight for?
That's a really difficult question because there's just so many priorities that are important for our community, whether it's improving the economy, bringing good jobs to the district, good paying jobs to the district, improving education and bringing resources, much needed resources to our educational system, access to higher ed and getting our student loan crisis under control, working on reining in the excess of Wall Street and the corporate dominance of our government, getting money out of politics. And there's a number of different bills that have already been introduced by incredible people already in Congress, whether in the Senate or in the House of Representatives. And so really my first priority is looking at all of those issues and identifying those pieces of legislation that can be helpful without having to reinvent any wheels. And then going from there in terms of developing my own legislation. I think as a freshman representative, you do have to be realistic about what you can accomplish in your first year. And so my first and foremost priority would be to really identify where I can be as helpful as possible, be as aggressive as possible, and help to push some of these priorities through and actually deliver for our district.
Great, thank you. Switching the topic to renewable and solar energy, I'm certain you're aware of the horrific mess that has been made in that arena in the state of Nevada by the PUC. What actions would you suggest to try and get those decisions reversed and get the rooftop solar back on the agenda in the state of Nevada?
Well, I certainly, first of all, that issue should have never been sent to the PUC. I think the legislature did a disservice to our community in not dealing with it. I think that it's definitely a complicated issue, but the state of Nevada and the federal government over the years has spent an enormous amount of time, resources, money to develop a green energy economy, to build out our solar economy in Nevada. We have businesses that were created, jobs that were created, and literally overnight, some of those businesses and many of those jobs were wiped out. And while it is a complicated process, that's exactly why it should have been addressed by the legislature with the governor and figured out a solution to the cap issue, but certainly not to the detriment of the solar industry and to the people who lost their jobs as a result of the inaction on that issue. So the thing that I would really press as a representative is working with the legislature and really trying to be aggressive in any way that I could to get them to address this issue in the next legislative session during the 2017 session.
Great, thank you. Let's switch to a little more about yourself and your background and how your life experiences have motivated you to run for Congress in the Congressional District 4.
Well, I talk about my background a lot, and primarily the reason why is because when I decided to run for office, it was very much because I was still seeing that families at our community, that so many people were still struggling from the very same issues that I dealt with growing up in North Las Vegas as a kid. And so for me to have personally experienced falling through the cracks in our educational system, personally experienced the school to prison pipeline, personally experienced so many challenges. Not only are these issues very meaningful and personal to me, but it's also a very deep awareness that we have to continue doing something to improve these situations. And so the fact that, I was on juvenile parole, or the fact that I dropped out of high school, are things that I don't shy away from because it's very much the reality for so many of our young people and so many of our families. And frankly, even if that specific thing isn't something that someone else has dealt with, they're still experiencing other kinds of challenges. And I'm very aware of all of that. And so I just think that it's important to be open and realistic about what our communities are still facing, and to do everything that we can to try to improve the outcome, to improve the lives of our communities, to improve our school system, our economy, etc., to improve the lives of people in our community.
Thank you. About 80% of Nevada is land that's owned by the federal government, the highest of any state in the nation. Here in Congressional District 4, of course, it has made national news with our citizen army headed by Cliven Bundy. And so it's a particular interest to us here in Congressional District 4. Would you give us your position on public lands and on the Bundy situation?
Well, first of all, I think that the leadership in Nevada, specifically Republican leadership in Nevada, very much set a dangerous precedent, not only for people in Nevada, but also for the rest of the country. That entire situation with Cliven Bundy and his armed militia. The United States has a militia. It's called the military. It's called the National Guard. We should never tolerate armed citizens that are challenging law enforcement and challenging our judicial system and label that as patriotic. That's not patriotic. That's called breaking the law. And I think that by enabling these people and calling them patriots and calling them American, the epitome of what American is completely false, and it was dangerous. And now we're starting to see the effects of that. So in terms of public lands, we need to be very clear about what those are. They are public lands, and we certainly have to work with the government and work with those folks who use those lands for ranching and for other purposes. But that's exactly why there's regulations. That's exactly why there's grazing fees, and that's exactly why all of those systems are in place, so that there can be a balance, between economic development and the ability to produce commerce on those lands, but also a balance between ensuring that we are preserving those lands, that the environmental sustainability is there, and that the history is preserved, and that they're lands that can be used by the people. And so making sure that we achieve that balance is critically important, but also making sure that we don't allow something like the Clive and Bundy situation to happen again, I think is also very important.
Great. So would you in Congress support additional enhanced protection for the Gold Butte area?
Yes, as a member of Congress, I absolutely would support additional protections for Gold Butte, for federal recognition of our public lands, not just Gold Butte, but other lands throughout Nevada, and not just in Congressional District 4. I think it's important to look at our state as a whole. Tule Springs is also in Congressional District 4, but there's a lot of amazing public lands that need to be preserved and protected throughout the state of Nevada, and I think that we need to continue being aggressive about that.
Great. What, if anything, do you think can be done by Congress to help the economy in Nevada?
I think there's a number of different things that can be done by Congress. First and foremost is really continuing to invest in economic development programs, continuing to invest in building out various industries in Nevada, whether that's our green energy economy, whether that's the development of tech, whether that's urban agriculture, whether it's tourism, environmental tourism. There's so many different industries and things that Nevada has to offer that aren't talked about all that often. Nevada is known for our gaming and our tourism, and that's wonderful. That's the backbone of our economy, but we need to continue focusing on expanding out the rest of our wonderful emerging industries, but also growing those industries that might not even necessarily exist now, like urban agriculture. So I think in addition to investing in those types of economies and emerging economies, that we very much need to continue focusing on improving our educational system and targeting our funds and improving the way that we fund education, and making sure that Nevada gets their fair share of federal funds for things like education and building our economy and apprenticeships and training programs, etc. Nevada is not getting their fair share, and we have to continue working to improve that.
Thank you. Well, we expect that this congressional race against Crescent Hardy will involve a lot of money from some of those far-right interest groups, the Koch brothers and others. They have historically supported him, and we can expect nothing different this year. What are your plans to fight back against the onslaught that is sure to come?
Well, I think that unfortunately, in our political system, that's just the reality of what we're dealing with right now in our politics. Every last person who puts themselves out there for public office is going to have to face an unprecedented amount of attacks. Many of them will just be outright false attacks, things that are just made up, lies. And because of Citizens United and the various other things that have been put in place, super PACs, dark money, that's a reality of politics. And I think that the very best way that you can inoculate yourself from that is to be open and transparent and run a good rapid response type of campaign that is constantly being out there, and also focusing on talking with the people. If you're not going to win an ad war because you're just going to constantly be outspent, And the fact of the matter is that with the dark money flowing and the amount of money that people like the Koch brothers and others are dumping into these races, the only way that you can beat that is by actually talking with people. And my campaign has always been a people-based campaign. We have knocked on literally thousands and thousands of doors just in this primary, and we will continue to do that. And so far, so good. That's the reason why we are continuing our very substantial lead in our Democratic primary, and why we anticipate that we will be able to beat back all of the money that is going to flow into this race. And lastly, I will say that because of the way that my campaign is funded, 90% of the money that my campaign has raised has come from low dollar contributions. We have raised close to $800,000, and 90% of that is coming from low dollar contributions, with the average being $15. So we are incredibly proud of the fact that we have raised an enormous amount of money that we will continue to be able to raise into the general, and really have access to the resources that we're going to need as well to run a successful campaign.
Congressional District 4 is one of the most diverse districts probably in the country. We have diversity in our racial makeup, economically, urban versus city, immigrants. How would you work to balance those interests, which is often sometimes very difficult?
It's about knowing your communities. It's about having experience with them. It's about listening to those communities. I've been very lucky to, one, have had the privilege of running for lieutenant governor and spending a lot of time getting to know people face to face, developing relationships, being active in communities throughout Nevada, whether it's Yerington or Ely or Pahrump or North Las Vegas or Summerlin or Mesquite. Every aspect of Congressional District 4 I have spent an enormous amount of time in, and I think that very much gives me an advantage in that it really is about listening to people. It's about understanding the differences between communities, between people, and recognizing that those needs are distinct. And I think that the only way that you're able to represent such a diverse community is by being an active listener and being very, very active in all of these different communities, and frankly learning from them and recognizing that that there's always something new to learn and something new to listen to.
Great. Now a little more of a fun question, maybe. Of course, we know there's been a lot of jabber in the streets about a new stadium and the Raiders coming to Las Vegas as an NFL team. Of course, had a request for huge public funds. Would you give us your viewpoint on whether it's a good thing, and if you do think it's a good thing, how it could be financed?
I think it's a good thing if it makes sense in the numbers and the amount of money, public money, that is going to have to be used in order to make this happen. I think it's very easy to get caught up in the excitement, the celebrity, the hype of it. For me, it's always about going back to facts. It's always about going back to whether or not things pencil out. And frankly, we should not be in the business of subsidizing corporations. If it works for the community, if it works for improving our tax base, if it works to create jobs in a way that does not burden our community, then we should do it. If it doesn't, then we shouldn't do it. And so that's my position based on the information that we have up till now. There's certainly negotiations and things that are going on. And ultimately, it really is about what kind of a deal we end up working out with. But if it means that the taxpayers are going to end up footing the majority of the bill, the bill, it's not something that we should do.
Why the heck am I running for this office with all the work it's going to be in DC?
Oh no, that's an easy question.
Yeah.
It's because it's worth it. When you can accomplish something for people, all of the hard stuff and everything that goes along with it, it doesn't pale in comparison, or it does pale in comparison, because you know, the feeling that you get in giving back and actually being able to make a difference in someone's life, it really is a little indescribable. It's so incredibly fulfilling and rewarding, and it makes all of those tough times and the difficulties and everything else that comes with the state of politics nowadays very worth it. So
thank you, Lucy. This has been the conclusion of our Let's Talk to Let's Talk series with congressional hopeful Lucy Flores, running for Congressional District 4 in the state of Nevada. Thank you for participating.
thank you so much for having me.
Very nice.